So today we are on lesson 22, which is the church. So we've been talking about the church, and the last time we were together we talked about the church, the foundation, and I know it was 2 weeks ago. So we talked about the role of the church. Remember that? The four characteristics would be the local body devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and prayer. And those are like the four essentials of what the church is supposed to be doing. And we looked at the foundation of the church being the apostles and prophets, remember?
Yeah.
Then we looked at fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayer. We looked at each of those things. And then the basic idea was the church, the function of the church is not to bring all the lost into the church, right? That's not the function of the church. The idea is that a local church is a gathering of believers, people who are already saved, and that is for worship and for training. And then the second function of the church is to scatter out into your places you live, places you work, places people go to school, and then that is the place where evangelism and service can occur. Now, of course, service can occur in the church today, or we're going to look at that. So were there any questions on that? That was a pretty long lesson.
No, we try to bring them in somehow in here.
Well, there's nothing wrong with bringing lost people to church, right? But the idea isn't, like, we pay the pastor to do the evangelism. So you bring all the unsaved people, you know, that's not what the church is supposed to be for. The church is supposed to be equipping people. And I know we asked that question, whether we believe that this church is an equipping church, and I know we answered probably not, or no, but most churches are not equipping people, so that doesn't mean we're okay. I think we should do a better job at equipping people. Have a class like this with maybe 100 people in it, right? That would be more serious equipping. Would you agree with that?
Agree with that.
So,
to evangelize, right?
Yeah, evangelize, serve the Lord, and however we can. Because a lot of people think, you know, oh, I serve in the church. You know, I used to have that mentality. You know, I serve in the church. I come to church and work. Then I go home. Come to church and work. Then I go home. Okay, the idea is that's not the place that you work for the Lord. You work for the Lord everywhere you go, right?
Out the door.
Yeah. So, lesson 22. So today we're going to be looking at the church, the leadership, and we're going to be focusing on the person. And next week we're going to be focusing on the roles. Okay, I believe that's what it is. I don't have it with me here, but so in other words, we're kind of splitting it up a little bit. So lesson 23 is the role of the leader. Okay. So if you're wondering why we're not really talking a lot about the roles, we're going to talk about that next week.
Preachers, deacon, trustee, they have to lead. I used to be one of them.
They're the official leaders, yeah. So one of the key elements, and what did I do with my notes? One of the key elements in the local body is the leadership of the church. Who are the leaders and what do they do? So we're going to sort of look at that this week and next week. And like you were saying, the central passage for leadership in the New Testament, central passages for leadership are 1 Timothy 3,
hope I can see that.
I'm not going to read the whole passage there, but and I also mentioned Titus 1 through 2. Now most of the requirements for leadership are in Titus 1, but I was reading this morning, chapter 2 does have a lot about sort of what the leaders shouldn't do and what they should do. So more practical instructions in the second chapter, whereas the requirements are in Titus 1. Now you mentioned elders and deacons and trustees. There's no word for, there's no trustees in Greek.
No.
It talks about elders and deacons. So the elders are the ones who have spiritual oversight of the flock, and the deacons are the ones who deal more with the service, like waiting on tables. Remember in Acts 6? It's because what was happening was the leaders of the church were spending so much time trying to distribute food and, I guess, money to the widows that they couldn't spend time in the word and ministry. So the idea was that the deacons would do more of the service and free the spiritual leaders. Not that deacons aren't spiritual leaders, but the ones who are in charge of the spiritual welfare of the flock, to give them time just to do that.
They didn't talk about trustees, huh?
No, there's no such thing as trustees. Trustees, I think, is more of like a state requirement.
Yeah.
Because when you incorporate a church, you have to have trustees.
Supposed to handle the finance.
Yeah, but that's really the I would say the deacon board, right, would be handling the finances more than the elders. But anyway, so that's, you know, probably why people are confused. So now what we're going to talk about today is that one key word stands out concerning biblical leadership. And we're going to get this out of Mark 10. I don't think we were in Mark 10 this morning. We were in Luke.
Well, you got to have one wife and all that.
Mark 10. I said, starting in verse 37 and through 45. And this is really the main message of today, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Mark 10:37. I'm going to actually back up into 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him, that's Jesus, saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Grant us that we may sit one on your right hand and the other on your left in glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They said to him, "We are able." So Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink the cup that I drink. And with the baptism I am baptized with you with, that I am baptized with, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many.
Boy.
So this is where we get the teaching of servanthood, right?
Yeah.
Because if anyone could have cracked the whip, right, it would have been Jesus, right? When he came the first time, I mean, he could have just cleaned house and basically set up his rule. But he came for a different reason. He came to die, to pay for the sins of the world.
They asked a big question there, didn't they?
Yeah.
They wanted to be right hand of God.
Yeah, and notice that he didn't say nobody would sit on my right and left. Right? So it wasn't wrong to seek for a position of co-ruling and co-reigning with Jesus in the kingdom. And I think probably all the 12 disciples, I think will be in a pretty high position of authority in the kingdom.
Malay.
Yeah. There are going to be 12 thrones, remember it talks about in Revelation. I think that's probably the disciples. And they'll sort of be like the prime ministers of various areas. Yeah. And then there'll be rulers under them. And that's where we would fit in. And so anyway, so I don't want to get too far off on that. The key is that in the world, in the world's view, leaders are bosses, right? When the world thinks about leadership, so we're talking about, in business and, in every area of life other than the church. Basically, a leader is a boss, and the boss tells everyone what to do.
I don't know.
And the boss, what's the saying that rule number 1, the boss is always right. Number 2, yeah, the boss is wrong, see rule number 1, right?
Even if he's wrong, he's right.
So that's the world's definition of leadership. In contrast, and we just saw a pretty big contrast here, right? There's a lot of contrast. I wish, we can't spend too much time in this text, but I always try to spend a little bit. And I actually, I backed up into verse 43. He says, yet it shall not be among you. Wow. But whoever desires to become great among you
Shall be your
servant. So in contrast to the church, leaders are to be servants. And I put a little dash there, so I'm saying servant leadership or under shepherds. So the people who are leaders in the church are supposed to be servant leaders. They're not to be like head honcho, guru, big boss type of people. Okay, and they're supposed to be under shepherds. In other words, they're not in charge of the church. I've heard people say that I'm in charge of this church. Pastors. I say, you're not in charge of this church. Christ is in charge of the church. You're just an under shepherd to Jesus. And then all the other leaders are under shepherds too. So, and I look at elders as being really the leaders of the church. And technically the pastors are under them, right?
Really?
They're accountable to the elders. It's really
elders could fire. Right?
Yeah.
They pay him.
So really, most churches I've been at, the pastor met in the elders meetings, but they were really not officially elders. They were not the rulers of the church.
The deacons and the trustees and all met with the preacher.
And the elders aren't paid, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is there's accountability there, and no one can accuse the pastor of swinging the vote, to raise his salary, right?
Although we had that here.
We were subject under the deacon. He was subject under the deacons and trustees.
We had that at the meetings, but every time someone came up, the pastor stacked the room so they could.
He had to sit out while we voted on his money when I was here.
Yeah.
We had to vote on.
But you get the idea.
We understand that. I understand that.
So servant leadership is an interesting concept. I think if you look in the business model, you don't really see that. You see like top-down charts, right? Head honcho.
We're not the
and-
bosses.
Yeah. So, in our chart, you'd start at the bottom. Right? Because Jesus said the one who wants to be, the leader needs to be least.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Jesus
so-
was here, he'd order you to give him the broom.
Yeah.
Yeah. You become saved first and you're at the bottom. You
This
start
is
at
an
the
easy
bottom.
question, we've already answered it. What is the greatest example of servanthood found in Mark 10? Jesus.
Mark 10:45.
So this is one of those answers where you can say Jesus is the answer.
Jesus Christ. Yeah.
He's the greatest example of servanthood.
Yeah.
His first coming was to die and to serve. And that's what the disciples were confused about, right?
He gave the
They
ultimate.
couldn't figure
the
out.
ultimate servant, right?
Yeah.
The ultimate.
Peter whipped out his sword
At
and
the
remember when they were gathering to arrest him. and-
Cut his ear off.
Yeah. I mean, he was ready to start fighting, but that wasn't his purpose. His purpose was to die and to serve. And then in the second coming, his role will be to rule. In fact, it says he'll rule with a rod of iron. So he's going to enforce the law, and there's not going to be a curse anymore. There's going to be saved and unsaved. We talked about that. There's going to be mortals. That's what I mean. There's going to be immortals, right, who are saved. Then there's going to be mortals, and among them there's going to be people who believe in Messiah and people that don't. So there's going to be a mixture.
Saved and unsaved will be there.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why there needs to be a government, why there needs to be co-reigning with Jesus, is because there's going to be millions and millions and millions of people being born. And there's going to need to be some order established. And Jesus is going to rule with a rod of iron, with all of the implications of that. Remember, Jesus said, I did not come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill the law. Right? And I think, he's not out to just open the floodgates and just do whatever you want, right? He actually intends to.
Some of them
For the
people
law.
don't want to serve the Lord, then they want to rebel against Him.
And they'll probably rebel against the people that are co-ruling too.
Yeah.
So, okay, now we're gonna. A lot of these notes are really not, detailed. These are sort of just general descriptions of leaders, and you could probably find better descriptions. I just went along with what was in the book, and I think it's pretty good. There are 4 Greek words that describe servant leaders, and the first one is in Philippians 1:1. Oh, and I asked the question, are we able to be used by God? And I misspelled. I typed
Yes.
serve others, not server others. So in other words, we're being used by God to serve others. That's servant leadership. That's what it means to be used by God.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean get a name for yourself or be rich. It's basically used by God to serve others. Philippians 1:1. There's actually 2 points we're getting from this. This is at the beginning of Philippians 1:1. It says, Paul and Timothy, bondservants of Jesus. So the word bondservant is from the Greek word for slave or bondslave. So in the, a bondslave was a slave for life. And sometimes in that culture it was forced upon you. If you were in a part of a family that was a slave class, your children would be slaves too. And then there's the other kind of slaves where the person voluntarily keeps himself as a slave because they love the master that they're working for. So, but either way, a bond servant or a slave is a sort of a slave for life. And the emphasis is that we are bond servants of Jesus Christ in Philippians 1:1. So we are His bond servants. We belong to Him, and we are serving Him. So when you hear messages talking about giving your life to Christ, it should be in the context of Philippians 1:1, right? It shouldn't be in the context of John 3:16.
Paul and Timothy were bond servants.
Yeah. So when you give your life to Christ, you become bond servants, and that's what that's talking about.
You're a slave to Jesus Christ too.
Right. So it's a decision you need to make. Am I going to serve myself, or am I going to serve Christ? So you decide to serve Christ.
Sometimes myself.
Second point is in 1 Corinthians 4:2, and you might want to keep your finger in Philippians 1 because we're going to turn back there. Philippians, I don't know why my notes did it in this order, but I'm going to just stick with it. 1 Corinthians 4:2. Let a man so consider us as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that one be found faithful. So that's the key term there in verse 2. That one be found faithful. So to be faithful is talking about being trustworthy. Because that is... then it talks about the judgment. It says, the next verse, for with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you, or by a human court, but I do not even judge myself. Yet, for I know of nothing against myself, yet I am not justified by this. In other words, Paul didn't justify himself. He said, says, he who judges me is the Lord. So when Paul did things and said things, dealt with problems in the church, with successes in the church, he was looking at it from the perspective of God as my judge. So in other words, the faithful, yes, so the idea of being faithful means you're faithful to God, and doing what He wants you to do.
Where my pencil go?
I can't see it either.
It's over there.
Anyway, so if we flip back to Philippians 1:1, and I put in your notes the end, there's another word at the end of Philippians 1:1.
What about 6:1? That one down there, we're bought with a price.
Oh yeah, that's a good verse too. I just threw that one in your notes. It's not in my other notes.
Oh.
So you were bought with a price. Bought with a price. Do you have it?
Yeah. For you are bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's.
Okay.
He bought his price with a cross, right?
Right. So that the whole reason that we should be bond slaves of Him, because He really does own us.
He owns us.
Yeah, I mean, He paid the price for us. And we talked about that. Remember the theological term for paying the price to get someone from the slave market? Redemption. Remember?
Yeah.
In other words, He paid the price to get us out of the slave market of sin.
To take us from this lousy world.
The third one is at the end of Philippians 1:1. It says, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi with the bishops and deacons. And the bishops are really referring to the elders, and the deacons refers to those who served, like we talked about before, meeting the physical needs of the church, as well as the spiritual needs. But like when you look at the qualifications for deacons, we talked about this before, it's really a higher qualification than elder.
Yeah, but
because the deacon had to deal with money, so they had to have sort of a higher, you know.
It's just the
we're
opposite here.
talking about integrity later on. So they had to be, and it's not that the elders don't have to have integrity, it's just that the deacons had the same spiritual requirements, although not so many as teaching. Like the elders talks more about teaching than the deacons do.
And prayer.
But the spiritual qualifications are the same for both. You know, not you know, I don't want to go into it. So Romans 12:1 is the fourth term that is used for servant leadership. Like I said, these are just some examples. There's others you could find, but I thought these kind of are a good start. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, and this is the phrase here, which is your reasonable service. Now, that's the New King James. What does the King James say?
I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercy of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service.
Reasonable service is the same.
And be not conformed to this world. That's the next word.
So it uses the reasonable service.
Which is reasonable
Now, I think there's some translation, and I didn't look it up, that talks about spiritual service. So the emphasis would be it's serving God. In other words, the reasonable service is to God. Right? That's what the verse is talking about.
It's got to be spiritual.
By the mercies of God, you present your bodies a living sacrifice. In other words, you are dedicating yourself to serving God, and that is your spiritual service to God.
Caring for others.
So you're fulfilling your responsibility. This is because of what God did for you. By the mercies of God, you should turn around and serve God. And then I put in my notes here, I said, serving God in all we do, in or out of the church building. So like the word for spiritual service of worship in the Greek word is where we get the word liturgy from. Now the Catholics churches or other liturgical churches think about what goes on in the church, right? The liturgy is what the priest does. Right, the lay people don't do the liturgy, right? It's always the professionals do the liturgy. But I would say that that's not correct. I would say everything we do is spiritual, should be spiritual service to God.
We all have a part.
Whether it's work, whether it's spending time with people, or recreation. In other words, we don't take a vacation from God, right?
It's impossible.
And it's not only in the church that you're good, right? The idea is that your whole life should be serving God. Now, in some cases, you can serve God better at some times than other times, obviously. But, I mean, if you're being paid to do a job, you can't just sort of just start teaching the Bible to somebody, right? I mean, there are some expectations, you know, for you as whatever role you're in. But you can still keep God on your mind, right?
Yeah.
When you're doing something, and you can just pray, or you can meditate on Scripture, and there's just all of life needs to be that way. Because we kind of compartmentalize things, right? You think, you know, oh, this is my God time. You know, like you'll have a quiet time, you'll say, okay, I did my 5 minutes, I get the rest of the day.
You mean you gotta do it all day?
So the idea is that this whole time should be God's time, no matter what you're doing. Summary: one who belongs to God, who faithfully serves others. In other words, a servant leader is one who belongs to God, who faithfully serves others in acts of spiritual service to God. One who, I just came up with that description this morning. I modified the one that was in the notes. I like this better. One who faithfully serves others and acts as spiritual. So I just tried to cover all these words there. That's all I did. And then I have leadership is servanthood again, second time. And there are three kinds of people. People who watch things happen, people who make things happen, and people who don't know what is happening. Okay. A spiritual leader is number 2, right?
Yeah.
People who make things happen.
I like to watch first.
Yeah.
I would say anybody, somebody, nobody.
Yeah.
People who make things happen, people who don't know what's happening. I don't know what he said this morning.
But we see that in the church, right? These three kinds. So,
somebody be asleep while he's preaching.
Yeah.
I can have a cleanup on a weekend.
Yeah, nobody shows up.
And then there's people that don't know what's happening. Well, I'm here. I don't know why.
Get out that
But,
shed.
I'm putting in my hour, you know, kind of thing. And,
I went back to nature.
See that over there? Pick it up.
So we could go a lot of different directions here. Just I thought I'd mention a couple things here for your sake and the sake of somebody who might be watching this. My favorite book on servanthood is Chuck Swindoll's book on, it's called Improving Your Serve.
I heard him this morning.
And I actually skimmed through this last night trying to find some examples. He has like a lot of practical examples in here. But he talks about, he uses himself as an example of sort of a type 1 Marine. He's an ex-Marine, take charge, no nonsense kind of person, and he didn't like to be second. He always wanted to be first. So that's an area that he struggled with, and
It goes with most Marine Corps guys.
yeah. So apparently they have trouble being a servant, because that's not what you think of when you think of a Marine. So he talks a lot about practical ramifications. It's not a real heavy doctrinal book at all. And he spends a lot of time talking about Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Okay, that was sort of an example of humble service.
Yeah.
Or you have the creator of the universe washing the disciples' feet. Okay, so that was an example.
Taking care of his equipment.
Yeah.
And one of the guys wanted a whole bath.
The problem is, one of the others should have done it.
Yeah.
That was the problem. But they were all too proud. They were talking about who's going to sit on his right and left, right? They're not discussing who's going to grab the towel and wash
Who
it
they
for his
think
feet.
they was.
So that was the whole idea. And he brings that out really well in this book. And then this is another book called The Church and God's Program by Robert Saucy. I think is how it's said, S-A-U-C-Y. And here he talks about a lot of things. He goes into a lot more detail than the other book that I showed you.
What about leaders?
About the idea of service, and ministry, and gifts. He goes into a lot of detail in this book, and I didn't mark the place I wanted to read, but the idea is of where Jesus was an example of service, and he really does a good job at hitting all of the points in here. Baptism, the Lord's Supper. I did mark one place where it was talking about liturgy, Romans 12:1. It says the New Testament believer does not have a liturgy to fulfill, for Christ has fulfilled it once for all. His ministry can be described by this term in the general sense of service to God and the church. So that's really our spiritual service of worship.
We all want to do that. I want to do that.
Yeah, and so he says here, the most characteristic word to describe the work of the Christian ministry by far is diakonia. Sounds like deacon, right? diakonia, from which the term deacon is derived. The basic idea is the service of a table waiter. And I put in your notes Acts 6, we didn't really look there. But it came to be used generally for service, commonly for menial tasks. The fitness of this word for the ministry of the believer is seen in its special quality of indicating very personally the service rendered to another. It comes nearer to expressing the concept of a service of love than any of the other Greek terms for serving.
What was the first part of it? Diakonia.
Diakonia.
That means deacon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually the Greek word for servant.
Diakonia.
And in Acts 6, it was serving tables, remember? They said
Evergreen
they
service.
appointed them to serve in tables. Yeah. Yeah.
They won't let us have our own table.
Yeah.
That's pretty good what he wrote.
So anyway, so those are two helpful books. There's another book I didn't bring, which is Gene Getz's book called Sharpening the Focus of the Church.
I like Swindoll.
Yeah.
Swindoll.
And so each one comes at, oh, and then I gave you the book, the Rodmacher book. That's more kind of talking about the technical nuts and bolts. And there's a good section in there on the metaphors of the church, where he talks about the body, the bride, the building, you know, all the metaphors. There's one chapter in there I thought was probably the most helpful, because there's a lot of metaphors in the Bible about the church.
That's the big green giant.
Anyway, so the key aspects. Okay, now we're going to go into a separate subject of integrity.
Yeah, what is that?
Should integrity have a place in the church?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're messing with my integrity.
There's a lot of these people in there.
Yeah.
He ain't over there yet. That don't mean not till he's met something else.
78. Well, this is a long song.
I told the preacher he was spending too much money at McDonald's. He said, you're messing with my integrity.
So, David,
I'll
it says he, right? So David shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hands.
Psalm 78, 72.
78, 72.
So
So in my translation it says integrity. 78, 72.
So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart and guided them by the skillfulness of his hand.
He led them, he said?
Fed them.
And guided them.
Guided them, okay.
Fed them. F-E-D. Fed.
Fed in your translation?
Yeah, that's King James.
Well, feeding the lambs. No, it's metaphor of providing for the sheep.
Metaphor,
Right.
metaphor.
So in
What's
other words,
that? What's
you
that?
don't lead the sheep into a bunch of rocks, right?
No.
You lead them to where there's food.
Or a spoon of water.
So that's the idea. The key aspects of the leader are integrity and skill. What is integrity?
Yeah, what?
I put down Luke 16:13.
That's what I wanted to say. That guy stepped out, that's with his integrity.
It says, no servant can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So integrity is a man who does not, or woman, who does not serve two masters. You're not split in your mind, right? You're not like doing something on the outside so that people will be on your side, and yet on the inside you're really doing it for a selfish motive, right?
Yeah.
That would be a person without integrity.
Make yourself look good.
They're like manipulating people. They have, they're serving two masters. And this is sort of more of a dictionary definition. Is adherence to a code of moral value or a quality or state of being undivided. So integrity means you're undivided. You're not trying to serve two masters. You're only trying to serve one master. The idea would be you're serving God.
Two masters.
You're not split. You don't have divided allegiances. So what is skill?
Something you could do with good authority.
I didn't have a biblical example, but there is a biblical example for skill. Remember the people that built the tabernacle in the Old Testament? talking about being skilled. So the idea is the ability to perform a job well.
Auto mechanic. You.
Yeah. It can be learned and developed. Now, the idea would be if you choose a person who does not have integrity, you can always teach them a skill, right?
No wonder.
In other words, if there's a person that has integrity and doesn't have skill, they can be trained. But what happens if you make leaders in the church that have skills, you know, maybe some sort of skills, but they lack integrity. I think I might have printed this backwards. Did I mess this up? Oh no, I got the wrong lesson.
92.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. There we go. I think I gave away my other one. So, now in my notes here I said it is dangerous to have a person without integrity and with skill be a leader in the church. Because what can happen if...
You can lead them astray.
Yeah.
Lead them on the wrong path.
He's going to try to do things that are not correct if he doesn't have integrity.
Where did you get this saying? Number 1. That's a good saying.
Keep your word.
If you say it, do it. Say what you mean. Mean
So
what you say.
you're moving on to the next section.
I like that saying.
But I actually came up with the last one. But somebody else, that's a common thing. So, 5 areas of character and integrity. And I already printed them out, that's why you're going so fast. Keeping your word. So if you say it, you do it. Say what you mean and mean what you say.
That's right? Good.
So that's a person of the
Nobody
word.
does that.
Yeah. So people either don't keep their word, they say they're going to do something, oh yeah, I'll come out.
I'll
And
be
they don't
there.
come out.
Where's yeah.
I tell them I'm not coming, then I show up.
That settles it, right?
That way I'm safe, I don't show up.
That's when the son had the bone out. He said,
I
"You
don't
see
know
me,
if that
I'll be
would
there."
work in this church.
I had his son with the bone out. He said, "If you see me, I'll be there. If you don't see me, I'm not gonna be there." He wouldn't give me any word.
The second area of character and integrity would be dependable. And have you ever heard of fat people? Faithful.
I know one.
Faithful.
Yeah. Available and teachable.
Wait a minute. Faithful, available.
Teachable. It's in your notes.
I'm teachable, but it takes a lot of work.
Oh, you
Yeah.
got it right here.
Yeah.
Takes
So-
a little longer.
He thought that was fat people because they were fat.
Well, yeah. Well, you'll remember it, right?
Yeah.
When you say it that way.
Yeah, it's right there.
Luke 16:10. I'm still in Luke 16 here. So Luke 16:10. He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust in much. Therefore you have not been faithful in an unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches. And if you have not been faithful in which is another man's, who will give you that which is not your own? And that's where the context for no servant can serve 2 masters.
You gotta be honest. You
I
gotta
just
be
sort of
honest.
backed up a little bit there, but I saw that there and I said, that's really what he's talking about. You're faithful in the little things, and the idea is a person who is faithful in little things will be faithful in the bigger things, right?
After a while, people won't believe you. Just start lying about everything.
And then available, because some people say, you know, some people will come out for the first meeting, but they won't come to anymore, okay? And it requires sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? If you're not available, well, if you are available, that means you're going to have to not do something else, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot you can do in life. So
Much so.
there's hundreds of things that you could do, but if you choose to be available to do this, then you're going to sacrifice your time to do that. And then teachable, that's pretty self-explanatory. Never stop learning and growing. So the idea to be for character and integrity is you find people that are faithful, available, and teachable. And you know how I always say, every time I open the Bible, I see something new. You know, and that's what we need to do. We need to be able to be open and teachable to learning things. You can never get to a point in your life where you say, well, you know, I'm going to just close this Bible. You know, I already know enough.
Reverend Stanley said that when he was becoming a preacher, he always found his answers in here. When he was just young and just becoming a preacher. The one that's a real good preacher now on television.
Hope he still does. Right?
Yeah, he still does.
Yeah, that was your point, right?
Yeah.
Not that he did it when he's young, and he doesn't do it when he's old.
I see the answer, but sometimes I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Number 4 is the tough one for me. Perseverance.
I said teachable. I just meant one
So,
teachable.
are you teachable, us guys?
So the idea is, you know, there's some people that say that we already know too much about the Bible. You know, we know more than we can apply. So they basically think it's wrong to study the Bible.
He said you know more than you're thinking of. Most of you
Yeah.
been in church for quite a while.
Okay, the third area of character integrity is honesty. Honesty. Ephesians 4 is a verse I...
Wow, 25 to 29.
Ephesians 4...
No more lying or speak.
You gotta be honest to bold now because they put it up on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Therefore, putting away lying, let each of you speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. It says, let him who steal no longer, but rather let him labor. Verse 29, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is necessary for edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers.
Don't curse. Oh.
So there is a
Is that curse words and stuff?
corrupt communication. Could be.
An out of class story you're going to tell somebody. Joke.
Yeah.
You have to walk away from them. Like
Standards of speech for Christians are extremely high. It says in my study Bible. The idea is that we speak the truth and we say what is right to say. And like if someone asks you something, the idea is that you speak the truth. You say what is right.
Yeah.
You don't just say something to stay out of trouble, right? You say what is right to say in that circumstance.
I've done it. I can't tell them.
Yeah. You say, I made a mistake.
Sometimes
If you make a mistake, say, I made a mistake.
Sometimes a good thing to say is I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't know, you were right there. What do you mean?
Well, if you don't know, you should say you don't know, right?
Yeah. Tell them the truth.
I mean, if you honestly don't know something, then you say, well, I honestly don't know. Or I didn't know that this was the case. I didn't see that, you know,
The door
whatever
was
it
shut.
I didn't see the key in the door. I didn't see that, you know.
That doesn't work when you get pulled over by a cop.
Yeah.
I didn't see that guy.
I didn't see the red light.
Yeah. That's still going to get a ticket.
Perseverance. Hebrews 12:1. That's another one.
Yeah, that's a
we hate.
hard
Well,
one.
that's a hard one there. To persevere.
Finish what you start.
Sometimes it's not because I don't want to finish it, it's I don't know how.
Well, you know how to persevere, you just don't want to do it.
It said, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set
Patience,
before
said
us.
Mike.
So the idea is that we should finish what we start. I put in there, I said, we have become a nation of quitters. I think, don't you think that's true?
Paul finished the course, huh?
Not that we've, yeah.
Didn't he?
Yeah, I wanna finish the race.
Yeah.
I'd
Seems
like-
like today people are more interested in finding an easy way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like me when I cook, whatever time's on the box, that's what I cook.
Yeah.
Ain't that human nature?
We went through that before today.
I think it's,
Yeah, you
you
said
know,
that.
I've got to say that, you know that I work on cars, and sometimes the easy way is the best way.
Yeah.
But this is talking about morally and character.
Oh,
So
character.
sometimes you take the easy way out. Like it would be good that, you know, I don't deal with this situation.
I'm definitely guilty of that.
Yeah. Like if you've offended somebody, I'm
can't-
just not gonna talk to them.
I can't
And
deal
just
with that.
avoid them. But that's not the right thing to do, right? The right thing to
Right.
do is to confront the person and to make it right.
You
Can you
bump into
forgive me what I said the other day?
You bump into somebody's car and walk away without saying it.
Or as Chuck Swindoll says, somebody bumped the car in a church parking lot, and they left a note on the car and said,
No problem, no
yeah, it said something like, "We are under Christ's blood. Isn't grace wonderful?" I've asked God for forgiveness. Isn't grace wonderful?
That don't fix my car.
It's getting more and more difficult for me to do stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Philippians, by Philippians.
So you get it. And then fifth would be a concern for others. And did you have a verse there, or are you just
I
jumping to
was trying to
Philippians?
find out.
Philippians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians.
Philippians.
I wish I had one of them Bibles with the thing on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is the advantage of people with phones, right? You can just go
When I was-
in your
Where's
jump.
that before Galatians?
3, 2, and 4. Beware of
You didn't wait till I found it.
Beware of dogs, beware of evildoers, beware of the mutilation.
Where are dogs?
Is that the right, I don't know if this is the right, I don't think this is the right passage. 2, not 3. Philippians 2,
What, 2? Instead of 3?
2 and 4. Philippians 2, 2 and 4. Fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. And then in verse 4, let each of you look out not for his own interest, only for his own interests, but also for the interest of others. So for a servant, meeting other needs is more important than meeting our needs.
Uh-oh.
I mean, that's a pretty strong statement,
That's
isn't it?
messed up.
I mean, I can think of examples where, you know, and life gets complicated, okay? Because there is sometimes when you need to take care of your needs, right?
I can't
But there should never be a point where your needs are more important than everybody else's.
I couldn't
So
fix
in a
that
tie,
transmission.
you always win. Okay, it should be in a tie. You know, you say, well, in this situation, I can deal with this later. You know, I got to fix the chimney or whatever you know. But this person is really hurting and they need help right now. So in a tie, you know, the others would win, and that's the way Jesus was, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't seek his own interests first. He sought the interests of others. That's our model, is Jesus, right?
Anybody done what he done, we could never do that.
So, the summary, the reason for leaders in the church, having leaders in the church, is for serving God and serving people with integrity, character, and skill. It's not that they be bosses, it's not that they get rich, it's not that they get their way all the time. The idea is service with integrity, character, and skill.
There it is, right there.
So, that's the end of the lesson, and we got done pretty quickly, actually.
That was enough.
I'll go
I
ahead
have
and,
to do that again on the 21st, I got a meeting.
What?
on the 21st.
It's right here at the church, but
Let's go ahead and pray and close. And, Father, we thank you for giving us instructions and for showing us the true nature of service and servant leadership as being exampled by Jesus. We can follow his example. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
One.